as a society, beyond just this immediate situation, we should start looking forward to understand how this experience is going to change us, or how it should change us. Because this is going to be transformative. When do we get back to normal? I don't think we get back to normal.
Are you ready for the truth?
Give me the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help me! You will never win, never again, my people ready for anything! No more secrets, no more lies, open your eyes, can you hear me? Destruction of the corporate corruption, feel my aggression now! The time has come, we are the ones we bring to pain! Nothing will ever be the same, it's judgment day and it's time to pay! We lead the way, we forward go, you can't stop the flow, you can't stop us now, it's the love you show! The family grows, you report your soul! It's rising! It's rising! It's rising! It's rising! Give me a
This is Dr. Cameron Kyle Seidel, ER and critical care doctor from New York City. 9 days ago, I opened an intensive care unit to care for the sickest COVID-positive patients in this city. In these 9 days, I have seen things I have never seen before. In treating these patients, I have witnessed medical phenomenon that just don't make sense in the context of treating a disease that is supposed to be a viral pneumonia. 9 days ago, I presumed I was opening an intensive care unit to treat patients with a virus causing a pneumonia that was ravaging lungs across the world, starting out as something mild, a cough, a sore throat, and progressively increasing in severity until ultimately ending in something called acute respiratory distress syndrome, or ARDS. This is the paradigm that every hospital in the country is working under. This is the disease, ARDS, that every hospital is preparing to treat. And this is the disease, ARDS, for which in the next 2 to 6 weeks, 100,000 Americans might be put on a ventilator. And yet, everything I've seen in the last 9 days, all the things that just don't make sense, the patients I'm seeing in front of me, the lungs I'm trying to improve, have led me to believe that COVID-19 is not this disease, and that we are operating under a medical paradigm that is untrue. In short, I believe we are treating the wrong disease, and I fear that this misguided treatment will lead to a tremendous amount of harm to a great number of people in a very short time. As New York City appears to be about 10 days ahead of the country, I feel compelled to get this information out. COVID-19 lung disease, as far as I can see, is not a pneumonia and should not be treated as one. Rather, it appears as some kind of viral-induced disease, most resembling high-altitude sickness. It is as if tens of thousands of my fellow New Yorkers are on a plane at 30,000 feet and the cabin pressure is slowly being let out. These patients are slowly being starved of oxygen. I have seen patients dependent on oxygen take off their oxygen and quickly progress through a state of anxiety and emotional distress and eventually get blue in the face. And while they look like patients absolutely on the brink of death, they do not look like patients dying of pneumonia. I have never been a mountain climber, and I do not know the conditions at base camp below the highest peaks in the world. But I suspect that the patients I'm seeing in front of me look most like as if a person was dropped off on the top of Mount Everest without time to acclimate. I don't know the final answer of this disease, but I'm quite sure that a ventilator is not it. That is not to say that we don't need ventilators. We absolutely need them. They are the only way at this time that we're able to give a little more oxygen to patients who need it. But when we treat people with ARDS, we typically use ventilators to treat what's called respiratory failure. That is, we use the ventilator to do the work that the patient's muscles can no longer do because they're too tired to do it. These patients' muscles work fine. I fear that we are fear that if we're using a false paradigm to treat a new disease, that the method that we program the ventilator, one based on a notion of respiratory failure as opposed to oxygen failure, that this method, and there are a great many number of methods we can use with the ventilator, but this method being widely adopted at this very moment in every hospital in the country, which aims to increase pressure on the lungs in order to open them up, is actually doing more harm than good. And that the pressure we are providing to lungs, we may be providing to lungs that cannot stand it, that cannot take it, and that the ARDS that we are seeing, that the whole world is seeing, may be nothing more than lung injury caused by the ventilator. Now, I don't know the final answer to this disease. I do sense that we will have to use ventilators. We will have to use a great many number of ventilators, and we need a great many number of ventilators, but I sense that we can use them in a much safer way. In a much safer method. That safer method challenges long-held dogmatic beliefs within the medical community and among lung specialists, which will not be easy to overcome. But I really believe that they must be overcome. There are hundreds of thousands of lungs in this country at risk, and the time to overcome them is now. I'm confident that if those of us that work bedside with these patients, those of us who are witnessing the things that we have never seen before, despite the many years we have worked and the thousands of patients and diseases we have seen, if we can effectively communicate this to all those that are so important but who are not bedside, the researchers, the administrators, those who procure our resources and make our protocols, the politicians, our own government, if we are able to convince them that this is a disease that is different than anything we have ever seen, I am confident that an answer can be found, that effective treatments can be discovered, and that a plan to disseminate that treatment can be rapidly deployed, and that tens of thousands and probably hundreds of thousands of lives and lungs will be protected. The time for this is now. We are staring into a future in which a great many of our fellow Americans are going to suffer. We are all involved in this future. So I urge you, for those of us, if you are out there, for those who work bedside, I urge you to speak up. We can change this. I thank you all for listening. Please spread the message and stay safe.
Ms. Fitzgerald, I want to thank you for making your point on your position on irradiating the public. And I also want to bring to all of your attention what is at stake. You know, the WISO bill was about as draconian as you can get, and it was really an attack on all of our rights to say no to technology that has not been tested for effects on human beings. I'm talking about the deployment of millimeter wave technology. These frequencies that are going to comprise the networks of microcell systems, those systems that you tried to have Mr. Domer have full reign over, but fortunately pulled from the last meeting agenda, have not been tested for effects on people or on wildlife. I'm going to talk about something tonight that I've never talked about publicly before, and I'm going to talk about it right now. The technology that's coming is going to be broadcasting at 60 gigahertz. That is the absorption spectrum of oxygen molecules. There are instances where 60 gigahertz systems have been deployed in the United States, and it is a weaponized system. You don't mess with oxygen molecules. 30 days without food, you're going to be really skinny and probably dead. 3 days without water, you know what happens. A very short amount of time without air, and it's lights out meatball for all metabolic processes in the human body and all other life forms as we know them. What happens at the molecular level when you have oxygen molecules being hit with radio frequency emissions at 60 gigahertz, which you think is fine, and you don't understand what this stuff does, and I'm glad you're going to be recusing yourself from all the votes, is it affects the orbital properties of the electrons and the hemoglobin's ability to bind the oxygen molecules. This is horrific and frightening, and health decisions are being made for masses of people by elected lackey bureaucrats that thumb their noses at warnings and believe the lies that come from the scientific apparatus that is owned lock, stock, and barrel by the wireless industry. I pray for Mr. Dummer that he exercises wisdom in the days ahead, because the tremendous responsibility that is almost passed off on him was one I would not want.
Andrew Huff is a spokesman for the Armed Forces Radiobiology Research Institute, which has been leading the Pentagon's quest for a more effective antidote to radiation sickness.
The symptoms of acute radiation sickness would be just exactly like a terrible flu. A person would have a headache. They would feel very tired. They would have a little bit of a fever. They might have some vomiting at higher doses. All of this would be more severe and it would come on more rapidly.
Acute radiation poisoning, which is serious, and it comes in 4 phases. First is prodromal. This is vomiting, nausea, diarrhea, anorexia, and more radiation makes this worse. It can hit you within a few minutes or days after an exposure. Second, you'd actually feel better. This is called the latent phase. You'd get over these flu-like symptoms, but you didn't actually get over them. If you had lab tests, they would show that you'd been poisoned by radiation.
At survivable doses, it would come on within about 6 to 24 hours, and it would be over within 2 days. And you might think, well, I'm okay.
Then maybe weeks after that, bam, the manifest illness phase hits. That's when a bunch of bad stuff happened too. And then 4 is recovery or death.
But really what's happening is the body is losing its platelet supply and its neutrophil supply.
It's not clear what happens, but doctors think your cardiovascular system and central nervous system swell with fluid thanks to damaged cells. In less than 3 days, the brain can't control the body anymore because of cell death.
And in order for you to feel sick from that, just like after chemotherapy, it takes a little while for infections to come up, to come about, or for you to have any kind of bleeding from the loss of platelets.
Because radiation is damaging DNA at the atomic level, acute poisoning is very hard to treat. Radaway does.
影音里面之间的有不同的密度、不同的平台，那么伴随真相不同，它就疾病不同。但这个，你看这个新冠肺，这个就它在这几个层面的膜玻璃因很淡很淡，这是早期，早期这种不能漏掉。
That exceeds anatomical borders. It simply crosses the lobar fissure here. But it's got relatively sharp margins, and that those two are key features for radiation pneumonitis. So it's
对，它快满期了，对，这都很重要的。它最后都变成两肺全部变白，它都说里面那个蛋白渗出，把肺泡填满，然后不能呼吸，人都会去世的。
So that's the key feature, consolidation exceeding anatomical borders, but with sharp margins reflecting the radiation part.